As we open up our image, we can see that all the tones are skewed a little bit towards the light right side. So it's going to be dropping that exposure down just a little bit. So we get this nice bell curve shape with a peak in the midtones. We're going to be increasing the contrast just to level out that bell curve shape. I'm going to be increasing the highlights and dropping those shadows down to create more depth and more contrast in our picture. As you'll see on the histogram, there's not a lot of information on the light right side. So it's going to be increasing the absolute whites just a little bit whilst leaving the absolute blacks where they are. Moving on, we'll be looking at the texture. We're going to be increasing this just a little bit to increase the contrast in the skin tones. We're going to be dropping the clarity down to decrease the contrast in the low tones, and we're going to be decreasing the contrast in the high tones by decreasing the dehaze. As you can see in the hair, we have lost a little bit of detail near the absolute shadows. That's where that blue is. We can bring that back a little bit later, but because it is in an area of low interest, it's not our concern at the moment. Now we're just going to be increasing the vibrance a little bit. This increases the saturation of every color except skin tones. Now we move on to the color mix. Now with saturation, that controls the intensity of the colors in our picture. And these sliders are absolute, meaning that the red slider controls all of the reds in the pictures, the blue slider controls all of the blue, so on. We're also going to be playing with the luminance. Now this controls how bright or how dark those colors are going to be. By dropping the red down, it creates a much darker, much richer color, whereas by bringing up the orange luminance, it makes it a lot brighter. You can use this to fine tune and do very light color correction on your images. We're going to go down towards the tone curve where we can fine tune our tones. So we're going to be increasing the highlights, increasing the lights, decreasing the darks, decreasing the shadows in order to increase the overall contrast and increase the overall depth in our picture, making it a lot more engaging. You don't want to go too far down on those shadows in order to preserve the details in those low tones. Ideally, you're looking for this kind of S-curve in your tones. And that's what works for most pictures. Sometimes you may need to bring it down a little bit more, but generally that S-curve is what you're aiming for in your tones. We're now going to go on to fine-tuning our picture. So here we're just going to be doing some light color grading, and here I'm just slightly changing the colors of the shadows. Before you color grade, make sure that you have calibrated your display to accurately reflect the colors that you are changing. We're also going to sharpen this picture just a little bit, and remember that sharpening just increases the contrast. It doesn't make details suddenly appear, it just makes them a little bit more pronounced. I'm also going to be removing the chromatic aberrations as well as calibrating the colors. You don't need to correct the profile on some pictures, and here I've left that because I enjoy how this lens shapes the picture. I've also added a little bit of vignetting in order to isolate our focus onto the subject as well as give it a bit more of a dreamlike effect. Some people don't like vignetting, but I think with this picture it pairs quite nicely. We're now going to add two radial masks to our picture. The first radial mask is going to intersect with the background and it's going to serve as our sun. So we're going to place it behind her head, right click on the mask and press intersect with background. We're then going to increase the exposure and increase the highlights. The second mask is going to be placed on her face and brighten up just a little bit so that it stands out in contrast to all of the blue that's around her.